when I sang this to a 2-year-old. Now, I admit he was a musical 2-year-old. He would pick up 2 sticks on a winter walk and turn them into a cello. But when I sang this to him, I was really quite surprised at how his ears picked up these rather enigmatic accents in the Hebrew Bible. I haven't read anything on them that didn't leave me absolutely cold, as that winter environment might be, until I came across the work of Suzanne Haïk-Vantoura at the 2010 conference on the Psalms at Oxford. And she demonstrates in her music just how much imaginative work there is in the placement of the accents. And I hope by the end of this lecture you'll agree with me. In this presentation, I'm going to have a look at the signs, the codices that I get my information from, Haïk-Vantoura's deciphering key, a little bit about the traditional definition of the signs. I will show how Haïk-Vantoura's deciphering key goes beyond the verse boundaries. I will show how the signs can be explained in terms of musical phrases. Have you ever taken an axe and taken a swing at a big piece of wood that you know should split? Haïk-Vantoura splits the wood in multiple pieces beautifully so that you can actually see the grain of the wood. This is all explicable in terms of musical phrases. We'll have a brief look at what little we know about the history, and I have some additional examples if anyone is interested. First of all, the signs. We begin with the letters. Here we have bet, nun, yod, without vowels or cantillation marks. If you're used to seeing them, you know this is bani. If we put the dagesh in, we know it's bani rather than vani. It actually occurs in both in both ways in the passage we're going to look at. If we put in the shva, we know that the first vowel is not really a full vowel, it's a b, like the second e in interpretation. If we put the I vowel, the shirek, underneath the nun, we can now pronounce the word as bani, my son. And finally, we put in a cantillation sign under the second syllable. And now this is music. And here is the music. Bani. In this case, we were on a B, we haven't seen that yet, and we move to the C. Each sign under the letters defines a specific reciting note. Now we move on to the codices. The most important codex for us with the signs in it is the Aleppo Codex. It's there where they first appear, fully formed, like Zeus or Athena out of the head of Zeus. They're just there. Who made them up? Here is the section on David's lament on the death of Absalom where the word bani occurs. It's in the middle 2 lines that I want you to focus on. I've put the typewritten text from the Leningrad Codex on the top and bottom lines here to help you see the Aleppo manuscript. It is a little difficult to get used to when you're first looking at them. So to the left of the Lamed on the second line is the first Beni. And to the right of the third line are the second two. The first Beni has the Mapach and moves to the C. The second two both have a Munach, and they return, as in this case, to a B. We'll see the music on the next slide. Here's the music that would come from it, just for those sections. Beni Avshalom, Beni Veni Abshalom, my son, Absalom. And here's a little of what the music might sound like. Vayirgaz HaMelech, Vayar Aliyat Hashar Vayevke, V'kohamar Belekto, Beni Abshalom, Beni Abshalom, Miten muti ani tachteka, Avshalom Beni. So, coming back to the theory from the music, the French organist and composer Suzanne Haïk-Vantoura, in the last half of the 20th century, following much experimentation, inferred that the signs below the text for the prose books correspond exactly to a tonic sol-fa scale with a raised fifth. As you can see in the image, that's in the bottom section, the C, D, E, F, natural, G sharp, A, B, C. In the poetry books, there are only 7 signs under the scale, and they're very similar to those in the 21 books, which we sometimes call the prose books. But they're both modal scales, but one of them just doesn't have the full set of notes. The second part of the deciphering key is what to do about the signs that are over the letters. Now, the signs that are under the letters are present in all of the verses without exception. The signs that are over the letters are sometimes missing. In fact, they're missing in 14% of the verses. Haïk-Vantoura interpreted these signs as ornaments relative to the current reciting note. This turns out to be quite a flexible way of dealing with the signs, but exactly which ornament is which, there's not as much information to try to determine it. Some of these are typical of ornaments that you might find in music of any time, like a trill or a mordant or a portion of a scale. They're all singable, and they set off the text in quite remarkable ways. There are several aspects of traditional interpretation. One of them is that the signs are primarily punctuation, and the other is that they are hierarchical. Both of these are limiting our ability to understand what's really going on here. First of all, there are too many signs for punctuation alone. And when you look at hierarchy, you can't start from where you are. You have to go to the peak of the hierarchy. You have to, it's a very inconvenient look-ahead reading strategy. You need to analyze the whole verse before you know what you should be combining. This is even true with traditional cantillation, which sees the signs in pairs and combines them in their pairs. The second aspect of hierarchy is that it's not required to describe a musical phrase. And by the time we're finished, I hope we can see how a musical phrase is described. In particular, with the way Haïk-Vantoura has interpreted the accents, the information required for singing is contained in the accent itself. Certainly, it's good to look ahead, as it is when you're reading a book, but it's not mandatory to look ahead to find out what the information is that you're looking at. It doesn't change arbitrarily because something follows it. It's always the same meaning. The other aspect of the hierarchy is perhaps almost a cultural thing. As the quote comes here from the 1744 article, the manner of applying these rhetorical points is tactical and resembles the marshalling of an army. But in fact, it's not an army, it's a song. And in a song, all of the notes are required to make the musical phrase, not just the most important ones. In fact, the most important ones have no importance if it isn't for the rest that are there. Now, if we look at some of the articles about traditional definition, on the Mishon Mamre site, Richter, who writes the article there, claims he supports the hierarchy, but then he has a universal escape clause. The real nesting levels stay nowhere constant and can jump up and down by arbitrary amounts. Well, that's not a well-defined system. Rubin, in 1993, complains that contemporary informants who write about the accents only tell us what we already know. But he hadn't read Haïk-Vantoura. And he writes in a way that discourages looking for what seems to be missing. People know that these are both music and punctuation, but they also know that the music has been lost. The question is there enough information in how they have been placed to infer what the music might have been? And traditional cantillation pays no attention to the distinction between above the letters and below the letters. So it's not using information that is in the usage of the set of signs itself. Going back to Rubin for a minute, in the discouraging of new knowledge, he says, to the extent that our melodic traditions are song-like, they're not like those of the Masoretes, but of the last few centuries of Western art music. Well, they may not be like those of the Masoretes, but they may be like people who came before the keepers of the tradition. He says cantillation was not intended to be natural, rather is explicitly artificial and ritualistic. Well, we could take that as negative, but artifice and ritual are also a part of beauty. And we will see that there's a great deal of beauty in these signs. Because people thought in terms of punctuation as the primary meaning of the signs, it has been common knowledge, as it were, to assume that the accents had no impact outside of the verse boundaries. So Wicks writes, a verse may be closely connected with the one preceding or following it, but musically and accentually no such connection exists. And 100 years later, Drescher writes, no prosodic or phonological phenomena span more than one verse. I will show you a couple of examples where this is simply not true. In fact, there are examples on every page where it's not true. Just listen for those verses that don't begin on the tonic note. They are signaling a connection with the previous verse or even the previous chapter. So, for example, in Job, and Job's an interesting book because it uses both sets of signs. Chapters 1, 2, and 42 use the signs of the 21 books, and also the introduction to each conversation where the narrator introduces the speaker. That's done with the 21 book accents. But all of the speeches are with the accents from the 3 books. So it's an interesting study showing, whatever else it might show, that both sets of accents can coexist. And And the conversation, when we look at 6-1, for example, where the narrator introduces Job in the second pair of speeches, and then in 8-1 he introduces the respondent, in this case Bildad, you can see that they are together a single musical phrase. 6-1 begins on the tonic, 8-1 begins on the third. This is the case for every pair of introductions to the paired speeches. The narrator in each case knew he was in the middle of a sentence, or we could say the composer knew that the narrator was introducing and completing a pair of speeches. If we look at a section of a psalm, for example, Psalm 18, verses 20 to 25, is an example of a circular structure. You can see from the V or the greater than shape in the chart that the words are used in one sequence as you approach verse 23 and in reverse sequence as you come away from verse 23. There are also several parallelisms within the section. Now, does parallelism and music, can they coexist? This is a question that has been asked of the accents. But going back to the psalm before we get to that, verse 20 in the psalm stands out. You'll notice it doesn't appear in this table, and that's because it's not connected to this table. It only has one recurrence in the whole psalm, the word rahav, for broad or spacious, which is also used in verse 37. So we have a circular structure, we have a number of parallels. How does the music highlight them as well? The central verse, 23, is highlighted here because it's the only verse that doesn't begin on the tonic. It has an accent on the first syllable, which overrides the tonic. So the uniqueness of verse 23 is confirmed by both the music and the recurrence pattern. Haïk-Vantoura's work can be accurately summarized with tables of musical phrases. The music fully supports both the punctuation and the prosody. And an easy thing to remember, in a musical phrase, there is no boss. This actually makes life simpler. Everybody, every sign, every phrase, every word has to cooperate in the creation of the musical phrase. So there are several ways in which we might approach the midpoint rest. Ya ta ta e b a, or e g b a, or e b g b a. Several different ways. And you'll notice that some of these are used in both the 21 books and the 3 books, and some of them are unique to the 3 books, and some of them are unique to the 21 books. Now this is the wood split. You can actually explain with this. You have probably 18,000 of the 21,000 verses in Scripture that have unique musical phrases. You can't subdivide them easily by thinking about accents as punctuation, but you can subdivide them clearly by looking at the way we approach the Atana, the midpoint rest, and the way we come away from it. It's a very clear approach, and it has tonality to it. Here are ways in which we approach the cadence of the verse, the cadence to the tonic of the verse. The sequence is returning to the tonic. Now there are phrases in The supralinear signs, as well, they contribute to the phrase through their ornamentation. And here are situations where we have 4 supralinear signs in a row on the same reciting note. So here's an example in Psalm 32:6 of a unique musical phrase. Notice there are 4 ornaments in the first bar. On Zot, we have a Pazar, and on Halel, we have an Ilui, we have a Pashta on the second syllable of Hasid, and a Zarka on the Ka of Eleka. Then notice the cadence on the supertonic, the Oleva Yored, and finally in the after the main cadence on the Atna, notice the Revia Mugrash, a very common pair of ornaments used. Now here's something from the history that is very interesting. This is the Tonus Peregrinus, and I agree with Mitchell that it is the definitive test for a deciphering key. If you have a key that deciphers Psalm 114 and it doesn't sound like this, then you're probably in the wrong place. So if we look at Psalm 114, the psalm that Tonus Peregrinus is still sung to, we find a rendition using the Haïk-Vantoura key that is very close to Tonus Peregrinus. And Haïk-Vantoura didn't realize this. It's David Mitchell of Brussels who points this out. If I just sing a little bit of it, you'll hear the differing reciting notes. Betzet Yisrael mimitzrayim, Bet Yaakov me'am lo etz, Hayta Yehuda lekadsho, Yisrael mam shelotav. That second is particularly like the Tonus Peregrinus, having the B and then the A as its reciting notes. So if we can just put this into a summary. The accents in the Hebrew Bible are of 2 placements, above the letters and below. Those below the letters define a scale. They're always there for every verse. Those above the letters are ornaments, and they are not there for some verses. There are 2 closely related sets of accents, the 21 books and the 3 books, the 3 books being the Psalms, the Proverbs, and the speeches of Job. Each of the sets of accents defines music for the whole sections of Scripture. Their impact is not confined to a single verse. They are not primarily punctuation or grammar. They are primarily interpretive music. The music connects verses to other verses within the same chapter, and it connects verses and chapters that may be adjacent or even separated. There are some very surprising connections. For example, Psalm 114 and Psalm 115 are connected. I'll leave you to research that one. The music can be understood through the tonality that it uses and the musical phrases it defines. Such understanding suggests ways of hearing the text that would otherwise be missed. We didn't spend much time on hermeneutics in this, but it certainly has an impact. The accents have an impact on it. The music complements the parallelism and the word recurrence. There is no conflict that I have seen in these three important tools for understanding the Hebrew Scriptures. So I hope this lecture has helped to give you a new perspective on this enormously interesting puzzle that people have been puzzling over for the last 1,000 years. Thank you.